The massive council chamber floated in the heart of Nexus Prime, a space station built by 7 alien civilizations working together over 300 years. Today, the chamber was full of noise and anger. Representatives from every major galactic power shouted at each other, their voices mixing into a storm of accusations and blame. Ambassador Katie Morrison sat in the back of the room, watching the chaos unfold. She was Earth's voice in this assembly, but nobody seemed interested in what she had to say. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 40 years ago. In a galaxy where some civilizations counted their history in millions of years, humans were considered children, newcomers, primitives, who had barely learned to walk among the stars. Katie was 42 years old, with short brown hair and tired eyes. She had spent 15 years in diplomatic service, and she had never seen the council this afraid. The reason for their fear had a name: the Vrex Collective. The Vrex were a nightmare made real. They were a hive mind species that consumed everything in their path. They did not negotiate. They did not make treaties. They simply arrived at a world, landed their organic ships, and absorbed every living thing into their collective consciousness. In the past 6 months, they had swallowed 3 frontier systems. Billions of lives had vanished into their hungry mastodon. Now they were heading for Kari Prime, the homeworld of a peaceful species that had never harmed anyone. The Kari delegate stood at the center of the chamber, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of pleading. His skin was pale blue, and his large eyes were wet with fear. "Please," he begged. "The Vrex will reach our world in 6 days. Our defense fleet is too small. We need help. We need a unified response." The Tovani High Commander rose from his seat. He was 12 feet tall, with a hard shell covering his body and sharp mandibles that clicked when he spoke. The Tovani were warriors, proud and ancient. They had one of the largest fleets in the galaxy. "The Tovani will not sacrifice ships for the Kari," he announced coldly. "Your people refused our trade agreements. You rejected our protection pact. Now you come begging? Face your fate with dignity." Katie felt her stomach turn. She had heard this argument before. Every major power was finding excuses. The Silvari claimed they needed to protect their own borders. The Morthani said their ships were too far away. The Vashan Empire had not even bothered to send a representative. The Kari delegate's voice cracked. "You would let our entire species die? 4 billion people?" Silence fell over the chamber. It was not a silence of shame. It was a silence of acceptance. Katie realized with horror that these ancient, powerful civilizations had already decided. They would let the Kari burn. She could not accept that. Katie stood up, and her chair scraped against the floor. The sound drew a few curious looks, but most delegates ignored her. Just a human. What could she possibly contribute? "Earth volunteers to lead a coalition response," Katie said, her voice clear and strong. "We have tactical experience with asymmetric warfare. We can coordinate a multi-species fleet if others are willing to join." This time, the reaction was not silence. It was laughter. The Silvari delegate turned to look at her. The Silvari were beautiful in an alien way, their bodies made of living crystal that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. But there was no warmth in their voice when they spoke. "Respectfully human," the Silvari said, "your species still measures its spacefaring history in decades. You have 12 ships in your entire fleet. 12. The Vrex command over 400. Leave such matters to elder civilizations. Your courage is charming but irrelevant." More laughter followed. The Tovani clicked his mandibles in what might have been amusement. Even some of the smaller species joined in, happy to see someone else being dismissed for once. Katie felt her face grow hot. Not with embarrassment. With anger. She reached down to her belt and tapped her communicator. Admiral Danny Cole, are you receiving this transmission? The laughter in the chamber died down. A few delegates frowned, wondering what she was doing. A voice came through the communicator, calm and steady. Loud and clear, Ambassador. I've been monitoring the session. Danny Cole was 55 years old, a career Navy officer who had commanded human vessels for over 20 years. He was not a large man, and he did not have an impressive voice. But something about him made other officers stand straighter when he entered a room. Katie took a breath. The Council has declined to provide assistance to Kari Prime. What is your assessment of the situation? There was a pause. In that pause, something strange happened. Several alien delegates shifted in their seats. The Devani High Commander's mandibles stopped clicking. The Silvari's crystalline body flickered with an unusual pattern of light. Then Admiral Cole spoke again. His voice was still calm, but there was an edge to it now. A certain weight that had not been there before. Fine, I'll handle it. Across the galaxy, in monitoring stations belonging to every major power, alarms began to sound. Automated systems flagged the transmission. Diplomatic warnings activated. Emergency protocols engaged. 4 words. That was all it took. Katie watched as the mood in the council chamber transformed. The laughter was gone. The dismissive attitudes vanished. The Devani High Commander was already speaking rapidly into his own communicator. The Silvari had gone completely still, their light patterns now pulsing in what Katie recognized as distress. She did not fully understand what was happening. But she knew one thing. Those 4 words meant something to these ancient species. Something that scared them more than the Vrex. The Kalari delegate looked around in confusion. What is happening? What did he say? Nobody answered him. The elder races were too busy scrambling, sending messages, calling emergency meetings. In the back of the room, Katie Morrison allowed herself a small smile. She did not know what Admiral Cole was planning. She did not know how 12 human ships could possibly stand against 400 Vrex bio-vessels. But she knew her people. She knew what humans were capable of when someone told them something was impossible. The galaxy was about to remember why they feared those 4 simple words. 37 years ago, humans were nothing special to the galaxy. They were a young species, recently emerged from their small blue planet, still amazed by the wonders of faster-than-light travel. The elder races looked at them with mild curiosity, the way a person might look at a child learning to walk. Cute, harmless, unimportant. The humans had no great fleets. They had no ancient wisdom. They had no powerful weapons that could shake planets. They were soft, short-lived creatures who seemed to spend most of their time arguing with each other about strange things, like politics and sports. Nobody feared humans. Nobody respected them. They were just another minor species in a galaxy, full of minor species. Then came the siege of Proxima Station. Proxima Station was a trading hub in neutral space, a place where species from across the galaxy came to buy and sell goods. On one ordinary day, 1,500 people lived and worked there. 300 of them were human. The Outer Rim Coalition was a pirate organization made up of criminals from a dozen different species. They had been raiding small ships and colonies for years, but they had never attempted anything this bold. On that day, they brought 50 armed vessels to Proxima Station and took everyone hostage. The Coalition's demands were simple: pay them an enormous ransom, or they would start killing hostages one by one. The galactic response was predictable. Emergency meetings were called. Diplomats made speeches. Committees were formed to discuss options. The general agreement was that paying the ransom was the safest choice. Yes, it would encourage more piracy, but the alternative was unacceptable losses. Acceptable losses. That phrase appeared again and again in the communications between galactic powers. Some hostages would die during negotiations. That was sad but unavoidable. The important thing was to minimize damage and reach a peaceful solution. Nobody asked the humans what they thought. Inside Proxima Station, a man named Ben Harper listened to the negotiations through a broken communication terminal. He was 34 years old, a maintenance worker who had spent the last 5 years fixing pipes and replacing air filters. He was not a soldier. He was not a hero. He was just a man with a wrench and a bad temper. With him were 6 other human workers, 2 women named Carla Diaz and Nicole Perry, and 4 men named Steve Grant, Eddie Ramos, Tony Marsh, and Pete Vance. They had been working in the lower levels when the pirates attacked, and they had managed to hide in the maintenance tunnels before being captured. For 3 days, they hid and watched. They saw the pirates execute 2 hostages to show they were serious. They heard the distant screams of people being tortured for information. They listened to the galactic diplomats talk about acceptable losses and minimum damage. On the 4th day, Ben Harper had heard enough. He found a working communication channel and sent a message to the human Navy vessel waiting helplessly outside the pirate blockade. Captain Linda Moss commanded that vessel, a small ship with barely enough firepower to scratch the pirate fleet. "Captain," Ben said, "they're killing people in here. The diplomats are doing nothing. I'm not going to sit here and wait for some committee to decide my friends are acceptable losses." Captain Moss asked him what he intended to do. She was required to ask. Regulations demanded it. Ben looked at his 6 companions. They were covered in grease and dirt. They were scared. They were not warriors. But when he looked into their eyes, he saw something burning there. Something that refused to accept the situation. "Fine," Ben said into the communicator. "I'll handle it." What happened next became legend. The 7 maintenance workers knew Proxima Station better than anyone. They knew every tunnel, every vent, every hidden passage. They had spent years crawling through the guts of the station, fixing things that nobody else wanted to fix. They made weapons from tools. Wrenches became clubs. Cutting torches became short-range flamethrowers. Pressurized gas canisters became grenades. They were not elegant weapons, but they were deadly in the right hands. Over the next 16 hours, 7 humans with improvised weapons killed 43 armed pirates. They moved through the maintenance tunnels like ghosts, striking without warning and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. They freed hostages in small groups, leading them to safe areas of the station. The pirates grew terrified. They could not understand what was happening. Their enemies had no guns, no armor, no military training. They were just workers, nobodies, but they kept coming, relentless and unstoppable. Carla Diaz took a bullet to the shoulder and kept fighting. Eddie Ramos broke 3 ribs when a pirate threw him against a wall, and he got up and strangled the pirate with a power cable. Nicole Perry, who had never hurt anyone in her life, killed 4 pirates with a fire axe when they threatened a group of children. By the time the human marines finally breached the station, the 7 maintenance workers were holding the main docking bay with nothing but determination and the bodies of their enemies. The galaxy watched the aftermath in shock. 7 untrained workers had done what no military force had been willing to attempt. They had not waited for permission. They had not followed protocols. They had simply decided that they would not accept the situation, and they had changed it. One surviving pirate was captured and interviewed. When asked what had gone wrong, he could only shake his head. "We had them outgunned and outnumbered," he said. "We had every advantage. But those humans, they did not know they were supposed to lose. They did not understand that it was impossible. They just kept coming." After Proxima Station, the phrase became a warning. Intelligence agencies across the galaxy began tracking it. When a human said, "Fine, I'll handle it," something was about to happen. Something violent and unpredictable, and often very bad for whoever was on the receiving end. Over the next 3 decades, the phrase appeared again and again. The Keth incursion, the Malazan crisis, the Battle of Void's Edge. Every time the galaxy hesitated, every time the politicians debated and the diplomats negotiated, some human somewhere would lose patience and say those 4 words, and then the impossible would happen. Admiral Danny Cole had inherited this legacy. He knew what those words meant. He knew the weight they carried. When he said them in response to the Kalari crisis, he was not just making a statement, he was making a promise. The galaxy remembered Proxima Station. They remembered 7 workers with wrenches defeating an army. And they understood that whatever was coming next would be far worse for the Vrex. Humans did not accept impossible odds. They just found ways to change them. Within 1 hour of Admiral Cole's statement, emergency sessions were happening on every major homeworld in the galaxy. Leaders who had been sleeping were dragged from their beds. Military commanders who had been enjoying peaceful retirements received urgent calls. The phrase had been spoken, and everyone needed to know what it meant. On the Tovani throne world, a planet of vast deserts and ancient fortress cities, the High Matriarch sat upon her throne of polished stone. She was old, even by Tovani standards, her shell cracked and weathered by centuries of life. But her mind remained sharp, and right now that mind was filled with worry. What assets does Cole possess? She demanded. Tell me everything about the human fleet. Her intelligence minister, a younger Tovani with nervous clicking mandibles, pulled up the information. Matriarch, the humans have 12 vessels in the region. The carrier ship Defiance is their flagship. The rest are destroyers and cruisers, nothing special by our standards. They cannot possibly challenge a Vrex consumption fleet of 400 ships. The matriarch's ancient eyes narrowed. And yet they will try. Yes, matriarch. Human naval doctrine is difficult to understand. The minister hesitated, choosing his words carefully. They have a concept they call acceptable risk. Our analysts have studied it for years. We believe it is actually a mistranslation. A mistranslation of what? Of suicide mission that we somehow survive. The matriarch was silent for a long moment. She had lived for 600 years. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had watched species come and go like leaves in the wind. But in all that time, she had never encountered anything quite like humans. Send observers, she ordered finally. I want to see what they do. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening. The Silvari Consensus, a network of crystalline minds connected across dozens of worlds, reached a decision faster than any individual species could have. It took them less than 1 minute to analyze the situation and agree on a response. The decision was unanimous. They must watch. If humans succeeded, the Silvari needed to understand how. If humans failed, they needed to document the threat response for future reference. Even the Vashan Empire, who had refused all diplomatic contact for 200 years, sent a cloaked vessel to observe. The Vashan were mysterious beings, rarely seen outside their borders. The fact that they cared enough to send a ship showed how seriously the galaxy was taking the situation. Ambassador Katie Morrison found herself suddenly very popular. Every delegate in the council wanted to talk to her. They gathered around her, asking questions she could not answer. What is the plan? The Kalari delegate asked desperately. How will 12 ships defeat 400? Katie could only shake her head. I don't know. Admiral Cole didn't share the details with me. But surely there is a strategy. Some secret weapon? Something? I honestly don't know, Katie admitted. That's usually how it works with us. Someone says the words, and then they figure it out as they go. The alien delegates stared at her in disbelief. This was not how military operations were supposed to work. There should be careful planning, risk assessment, probability calculations. The idea of charging into battle without a complete strategy was madness, but that was exactly what humans did. Meanwhile, aboard the carrier ship Defiance, Admiral Danny Cole stood before his senior officers in the briefing room. The room was small and functional, with metal walls and harsh lighting. There were no decorations, no symbols of power. Just a group of people preparing to do the impossible. Commander Lisa Wong was his tactical officer, a woman of 40 with a sharp mind and a calm voice. Lieutenant Greg Palmer handled weapons, a young man with red hair and freckles who looked like he should still be in school. Chief Megan Torres ran engineering, a stocky woman with grease-stained hands and a talent for making broken things work. The situation is simple, Cole told them. The Vrex will reach Kari Prime in 6 days. The Kalari have already evacuated their defense fleet, following standard galactic protocol for unwinnable engagements. That leaves 4 billion civilians with no protection. And us, Lisa Wong added. And us. 12 ships against roughly 400 Vrex biovessels. Cole paused, letting the numbers sink in. The odds are not good. Greg Palmer raised his hand. He was young enough to still ask permission before speaking. Sir, what exactly is the plan? Cole looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned to Chief Torres. Chief, what's your assessment? Torres leaned back in her chair. She had served under Cole for 8 years. She knew how he operated. Sir, are we doing the thing where we pretend this is a reasonable military operation? Or are we skipping straight to what you call creative problem-solving? A few officers laughed quietly. Cole almost smiled. Torres, when have I ever asked you to do something reasonable? Never, sir. Just checking. Cole turned back to the group. His expression grew serious. Here's the truth. I don't have a complete plan. The Vrex are overwhelming in number and firepower. Any conventional approach will fail. So we're not going to use a conventional approach. He activated the display screen, showing a map of the Kalari system. We're going to put ourselves directly between the Vrex and the planet. We're going to make them come through us. And then we're going to hurt them so badly that they'll never forget it. That sounds like a suicide mission, sir, someone said from the back of the room. Cole nodded slowly. It might be. But here's what I've learned in 30 years of service. The galaxy is full of ancient, powerful species who have forgotten how to fight. They calculate odds and make safe choices and accept losses. They've forgotten what it means to refuse surrender. He looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes. We're going to remind them. And maybe, if we hurt the Vrex badly enough, if we show the galaxy that these monsters can bleed, those ancient powers will remember what courage looks like. The room was silent. Then Chief Torres stood up. Well, she said, I've always wanted to punch a hive mind in the face. Where do we start? Across the fleet, similar conversations were happening. 12 ships, 3,000 humans. All of them preparing to fight an enemy that outnumbered them. 40 to 1. None of them planned to run. That was the difference between humans and the elder races. Humans did not know how to accept the impossible. They only knew how to fight it. The Vrex consumption fleet entered the Kalari system on the morning of the 6th day. 417 bioships, each one a living organism designed for one purpose, to consume everything in its path. They moved through space like a swarm of locusts, blocking out the stars with their massive bodies. The Vrex overmind, the collective intelligence that controlled all 400 ships, expected an easy victory. Their scouts had reported that the Kalari defense fleet had already fled. The planet was undefended. 4 billion lives waited to be absorbed into the collective. Then they detected the human fleet. 12 ships. Just 12 tiny metal vessels, positioned directly between the wrecks and their target. They were not hiding. They were not running. They were simply sitting there, blocking the path. The Overmind was confused. This made no sense. No rational species would place such a small force against such overwhelming odds. It was not a defense. It was not even a delaying tactic. It was just standing in the way. The Overmind opened the communication channel. Perhaps these creatures could be convinced to move aside. There was no need for unnecessary conflict. Human vessels. The Overmind broadcast, its voice echoing through the void. You cannot win this engagement. You are outnumbered. You are outgunned. Withdraw now, and you will be spared. Resist, and you will be consumed. Admiral Danny Cole stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the massive swarm of wrecked ships on his screen. Behind him, his crew worked in tense silence. Commander Lisa Wong tracked enemy movements. Lieutenant Greg Palmer prepared weapons. Chief Megan Torres monitored the engines, ready to push them beyond their limits. Cole picked up the communicator. His response was broadcast on all frequencies, heard by every watching alien vessel in the system. "You're probably right," he said calmly. "We probably can't win. But here's the thing about humans. We're really bad at knowing when to quit." He cut the channel and turned to his crew. "All ships, engage." The battle that followed would be studied in military academies for centuries. It would be called madness by some and genius by others. But everyone who watched agreed on one thing. They had never seen anything like it. The human ships did not try to fight the wrecks in a traditional sense. They could not win a straight battle. Instead, they fought like wounded animals, throwing themselves at the enemy with a ferocity that defied all logic. The cruiser Relentless was the first to fall. Enemy fire destroyed its main engines in the second hour of combat. Any other species would have ordered the crew to abandon ship. Captain Amy Santos had a different idea. "Helm, set collision course for that big ugly one in the center," she ordered. "Everyone else, get to the escape pods." Her helmsman, a young man named Chris Taylor, stayed at his station. "I'll need to steer until the last second, Captain. Autopilot can't handle the adjustments." Santos wanted to argue. She wanted to order him off the ship. But she saw the look in his eyes and understood. He was not going to leave. "Then we'll do it together," she said. The Relentless hit the largest wreck's bioship at full speed. The explosion was visible from across the system. Both ships were destroyed instantly. But in that moment of impact, 16 other wreck's vessels were caught in the blast radius. Saunders and Taylor took 17 enemies with them into death. On the destroyer Ironside, Commander Paula Kent faced a different problem. Wreck's boarding parties had breached the hull. Dozens of the parasitic creatures were flooding through the corridors, absorbing any crew member they caught. Kent made a decision that would have horrified any military textbook. She ordered all compartments vented to space. "Ma'am, our people," her first officer started to protest. "Our people are putting on vacuum suits right now," Kent interrupted. "The wrecks don't have vacuum suits. They're biological. They need air." She was right. The humans sealed themselves in their suits and continued fighting in airless corridors. The wreck's boarders suffocated and died, their bodies floating in the emptiness. Kent's crew hunted down the survivors with cutting tools and magnetic boots. Fighting hand-to-hand in the silence of space, the corvette Swift Wind, the smallest ship in the fleet, performed the most insane maneuver of all. Commander Ryan Mitchell flew his tiny vessel directly into the mouth of the wreck's flagship. The bioship tried to close around him to digest the metal intruder. Mitchell waited until he was deep inside, surrounded by living tissue. Then he detonated his reactor. The flagship exploded from the inside out. Fragments of it scattered across the battlefield, damaging dozens of nearby Rex vessels. Mitchell and his crew of 32 died instantly, but they took the enemy's command ship with them. Hour after hour, the battle continued. Human ships fell one by one, but each one made the Rex pay a terrible price. The watching alien observers counted the losses with growing disbelief. "They've destroyed over 200 Rex ships," the Torvani observer reported to his homeworld. "They've lost 8 vessels, but they've killed over 200 of the enemy." "That's impossible," came the reply. "Check your sensors." "I've checked them 3 times. The numbers are accurate. And they're not retreating. They're not even trying to preserve their forces. It's like they don't understand that losing is possible." By the 9th hour, only the Defiance remained functional. The carrier ship was badly damaged, surrounded by Rex vessels, but still fighting. Admiral Cole had lost both his engines and half his weapons. Most of his crew was dead or wounded. He opened a channel to the Galactic Council, who were watching from a safe distance. "Still not willing to help?" he asked. Blood ran down his face from a cut on his forehead, but his voice was steady. The Silvari consensus responded. "Human, you have proven your courage. Retreat is not dishonor. You have done more than anyone expected." Cole laughed. It was not a happy sound. "I wasn't asking for permission to retreat. I was asking if you're ready to stop being cowards." Silence filled the channel. Then, incredibly, a new voice broke through. The Tovani High Commander, speaking from his observation ship. "Tovani 3rd Fleet, this is your commander. Engage the Rex immediately." Moments later, the Silvari joined. Then the Vishan, breaking 2 centuries of isolation. Within minutes, 500 Allied vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel and slammed into the Rex's exposed flanks. The tide of battle turned. On the bridge of the Defiance, Cole watched the reinforcements arrive. Chief Torres appeared beside him, her arm in a makeshift sling. "Guess you were right, sir," she said quietly. "They just needed to be reminded what courage looks like." Cole nodded slowly. 8 human ships destroyed. Over 800 humans dead. But the Vrex were breaking. Their consumption fleet, shattered by the combined assault of the galaxy's mightiest powers, thought it was not a victory. Not yet, but it was something close to hope. The Battle of Kari Prime ended on the 7th day. By the time the last Vrex ship was destroyed, the combined fleet had grown to over 600 vessels from a dozen different species. What had started as a human suicide mission had become the largest military operation in galactic history. The Vrex Collective was shattered. Of their 417 bioships, not a single one survived. Their expansion into civilized space had been stopped, and their hive mind would need generations to recover from the loss. 4 billion Kalari civilians woke up that morning to find their world still standing. They had been told to prepare for the end. Instead, they received salvation, but the cost had been terrible. Of the 12 human ships that had stood against the Vrex, only 3 survived in any functional capacity. The Defiance, barely holding together, limped back to port with hull breaches on every deck. The frigate Endeavour had lost 2/3 of its crew, but somehow remained spaceworthy. The patrol vessel Guardian had been crippled early in the battle, but had been recovered by Allied ships after the fighting ended. 812 humans had died. Out of 3,000 who had entered the battle, more than a quarter were gone forever. Admiral Danny Cole attended every funeral. The services were held over 3 weeks. On Earth and on colonies scattered across human space. Cole traveled to each one, standing in the back of churches and memorial halls, listening to families cry for their lost loved ones. He memorized their names. He learned their stories. He carried their memory like a weight on his shoulders. Captain Amy Santos had been a grandmother. She had 3 grandchildren who would never see her again. Commander Ryan Mitchell had been engaged to be married. His partner waited for a wedding that would never happen. Chris Taylor, the young helmsman who had stayed at his post, had been 22 years old. He had joined the Navy to pay for college. Cole knew that he had sent these people to their deaths. He also knew that if he had to do it again, he would make the same choice. That was the burden of command, making impossible decisions and living with the consequences. 6 months after the battle, a memorial ceremony was held on Earth. Leaders from across the galaxy came to pay their respects. It was the largest gathering of alien dignitaries in human history. Ambassador Katie Morrison stood on the stage, looking out at the crowd. Humans and aliens sat together, united in grief and gratitude. Behind her, 812 names were carved into a wall of black marble, a permanent record of those who had given everything. She gave a short speech. She spoke about courage and sacrifice and the bonds that form between species in times of crisis. She did not speak for long. There was nothing she could say that would match the weight of those names on the wall. After the ceremony, the Kalari ambassador approached Admiral Cole. His name was Vethkin, and he had been the delegate who had begged for help in the council chamber all those months ago. He carried his ceremonial blade in his 4 hands, wrapped in silk the color of a sunset. "Admiral Cole," Vethkin said, his voice thick with emotion, "my people wish to honor you. This blade belonged to our first planetary leader over 10,000 years ago. It has never been given to an outsider, but you saved our world. We have no way to repay this debt." Cole accepted the blade with a respectful nod. He looked at it for a moment, feeling the weight of history in his hands. "You could vote for humanity's permanent seat on the Security Council," he said finally. "That would be a start." Vethkin blinked his large eyes. Then he smiled, a gesture his species had learned from humans. "It would be our honor, Admiral." The vote happened 3 months later. For the first time in galactic history, a species that had been spacefaring for less than a century was given a permanent seat among the Elder Powers. The vote was unanimous. Even the Torvani, who had laughed at Katie Morrison in the council chamber, supported the motion. At the ceremony marking the event, the Torvani High Commander approached Katie. He was enormous, towering over her like a mountain of chitin and muscle. His mandibles clicked in a pattern she had learned to recognize as respect. "Ambassador Morrison," he said, "I must apologize for my behavior in the council. I dismissed your species as children. I was wrong." Katie looked up at him. "What changed your mind?" The High Commander was silent for a moment. Then he gestured toward the window, where the stars burned cold and distant. "I have lived for 300 years, he said slowly. "I have fought in a dozen wars. I have seen species rise and fall. But I have never seen anything like what your Admiral Cole did at Kari Prime." He paused, his ancient eyes studying her. "Your people do not accept limitation. You do not recognize impossible. Every time we tell you that something cannot be done, someone among you says those words, and then you do it anyway." Katie smiled slightly. "We call it stubbornness. Some people consider it a flaw. It is not a flaw. It is a gift." The High Commander leaned closer. "Mark my words, Ambassador. One day, your species will rule this galaxy. Not through force, but through the simple fact that you refuse to stop pushing forward." Across the room, a junior Silvari diplomat was researching human history, trying to understand the species that had changed everything. He found records of ancient battles. Dunkirk, where a trapped army refused to surrender. Stalingrad, where civilians fought in the ruins of their city. Thermopylae, where 300 warriors stood against an empire. He found a word that appeared again and again in human literature, a concept that seemed to define them more than anything else. Defiance. When all logic demanded surrender. When numbers and odds and rational calculation said retreat was the only option. Humans looked at the impossible and refused to accept it. Fine, I'll handle it. 4 words that had become a galactic emergency signal. 4 words that made ancient powers pause and younger species take notice. 4 words that carried the weight of a species that simply did not know how to quit. Admiral Danny Cole retired 2 years after the battle. He spent his remaining days on a small farm on Earth, far from the stars he had fought among. But even there, he remained a legend. Visitors came from across the galaxy just to meet him, to shake his hand, to ask him what he had been thinking when he faced 400 enemy ships with only 12 of his own. His answer was always the same. I was thinking that someone had to do something. So I did. That was the human way. That was the answer that had changed everything. Somewhere in the galaxy, a new crisis was building. Somewhere, a young human officer was listening to diplomats argue and politicians delay. Somewhere, patience was running out. And when the moment came, when the impossible needed to be done, the words would come again. Fine, I'll handle it. The galaxy had learned to listen for those words. And they had learned to be ready, because when humans said them, the impossible was about to become possible every single time.